why does that matter if I still suffer? And so this is a question that we were faced up against this week with these high schoolers. And I think that's a good question, and that's kind of the question that we're hopefully going to be talking about today. But the first question that I want to address is, where is suffering? Because certainly we see suffering in the poor, right? We see suffering in the news, we see suffering far away. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we know that we experience suffering close to our own hearts. We experience it in our own lives. Because all of us suffer in some capacity. So in the last few weeks, I don't know about you guys, but from what I've been seeing in the news, it's been a lot of images of destruction and a lot of images of death. And I think we see these and we recognize injustices and our hearts are moved by them. And I think in a lot of ways, we're an entire nation, we're a whole nation with heavy hearts in our chest. And so that's where we are, that's how we come to this place. And so we all suffer, but how are we to encounter suffering in ourselves and in others? And I don't know about you guys, but I think I've encountered a few things that people say that are not helpful when encountering suffering. Maybe you've heard these before, maybe you've said them. It was God's will, or it was God's plan. What you're going through isn't as awful as you think it is. And if you just had more faith or a more positive attitude, you'd feel better. You need to cheer up and remember this is all for the best. I know, because my situation was much worse, and I made it through joyfully. So if you need me for anything, advice or otherwise, just call. But I think there's a certain wordlessness in the face of suffering. We don't know what to say. Other people don't know what to say. We don't know what we can say. And I think the same thing is true when we look at the cross. We see the brutality and the suffering of Jesus on the cross, and we're wordless in the face of that because what could be said? What can we say? Because we speak no words, but what we see is love, right? We see that this is an act of love. And we're wordless, but what we see is the darkest ashes that have ever existed in all of humanity being made beautiful through this act. And so when we're wordless, I think sometimes that's okay, sometimes that's appropriate. And sometimes all we can do is walk with each other, walk with our brothers and sisters and be in the suffering with them. Sometimes all we can do is have compassion in our hearts for them and to show that. The word compassion, if you break it down, it actually means to suffer with. And that's where community comes in. That's where our brothers and sisters come in, is we're called to suffer with each other. So this night is not a question of why do we suffer. It's not a question of where does suffering come from. Because we all experience it, we all know it, we all recognize it, we've all seen it in our own lives. So it's a question of, is there beauty in the midst of suffering? Where can we find beauty in the midst of our own suffering? So one way that I've encountered beauty in the midst of suffering in this last year has been through this incredible young woman. Her name is Mallory, and you can see Mal's over here, and then this is her sister Bree. And they're Irish twins. They were completely inseparable. And they loved the Lord a lot. And one thing that they would do, they prayed Lectio Divina together a lot. And Mal had this journal that she would keep every day, and she would write a rose for the day and a thorn for the day. In December of 2016, Mal collapsed, and she had to be taken into the hospital. And they spent the entire day doing tests, and they found a tumor. She had a rare and aggressive form of cancer, and it's spreading really quickly. And one thing that I think is amazing is one of the first things that she said when she found out that she had cancer to her mom was, "Mom, we're going to pray, we're going to hope, and we're not going to worry." She was 16. You might recognize that. That's from Padre Pio, and that became her motto throughout this time. Mal really loved Lord of the Rings, and if there's any Lord of the Rings fans in here, you might recognize this quote, but this is her favorite quote. "All we must decide is what to do with the time we've been given." And I think she lived that really well. One day in her Lectio Divina journal, she was reflecting on the story of the 10 virgins. And she wrote, well, nothing really stuck out to me, and so I picked something. And it's kind of like, you only have one chance to live a life worthy of heaven. That's what she wrote. I remember one time I visited Mal and her beautiful sister Bree in the hospital, and I remember I was sitting on her bed, and I looked at her, and I said, Mal, is there any beauty in this? And she looked me in the eyes, and she said, yes, and I wouldn't change a thing. A 16-year-old girl in a hospital bed with a disease that is tearing her life away, and she wouldn't change a thing. So many people lifted her up in prayer. So many people lifted her family up in prayer. And her family is actually steadfast in faith. They're so beautiful. But on November 7th of last year, so it was just actually a year and a week ago today, things took a turn for the worst. And a priest that we both know was at a youth ministers meeting, and one of the youth ministers came up to him and said, Father Mike, we need to pray for Mal. And he said, right now? And she said, we need to pray that either Mal is healed today or that she glorifies the Father in her death. When they were in Duluth, and so they all turned towards the direction of the hospital, and they extended their hands, and they prayed. They prayed towards the hospital for Mal. But what they didn't know is at that exact moment that they were extending their hands and that they were praying towards the hospital, Mallory was being confirmed in her hospital room by the bishop. A few hours later, the same priest was saying Mass for Mal, and the moment of the prayers of consecration when he was lifting Jesus up into the air, Mal passed from this life into eternal life. That exact moment. She had 12 priests at her funeral, and the chapel was packed. And the reading that was read was this one from Wisdom 3. God tried them and found them worthy of himself. As gold in the furnace, he proved them, and as sacrificial offerings, he took them to himself. In the time of their visitation, they shall shine, and shall dart about as sparks through stubble. And I think that's really fitting because that's what Mal was. She was a spark. And so, one thing that was kind of funny was, after the funeral, we all went outside and we stood in a circle and we lit sparklers, kind of responding to this passage. And what happened was we lit the sparklers and it was really beautiful and really sentimental, but then everybody started choking and coughing because of the smoke. And I think she would have thought that was really funny. Anyway, the beautiful part of it was that we were together, and the heaviness that we experienced in our own heart was now consoling and beautiful because she accepted her own sufferings with joy. So Mal left behind her journal of roses and thorns, and one thing that she wrote on December 23rd, 2016, the day that she was diagnosed with cancer, was this. Rose. Going to adoration and handing my load to God. Thorn. Spending all day in the ER and finding the tumor. But that's also kind of my rose. Smiley face. There is beauty in suffering because I've seen it. And this past 12 months, I've seen the way that the Lord has completely transformed and worked in her family and brought beauty out of ashes. I've seen the way that he has worked in her sister Bree, who, she lost her best friend, she lost her sister, she lost everything. But somehow she's one of the most joyful humans that I've ever met. Somehow she knows that there's beauty in the midst of ashes, and that he brings love and beauty out of suffering. There's beauty in the ashes of a 16-year-old girl dying from cancer, and he has worked beauty in the midst of your sufferings too. This is just one story that illustrates that. And so now we're actually going to hear from some of you the way that you guys have encountered suffering in your own life and the way that the Lord has brought beauty out of that. So we have a video